Hey, what's up, everyone? My name's Zack Olinger. In this podcast series, I talk about relationships. Now, I know, as a man, you may not want to talk about relationships, or you may even tell me that the relationship that you're in is already pretty good. But I'm going to invite you to consider this. Could you be a little bit more fulfilled in the relationship that you have? I would like to have you consider that there may be other ways to kind of see the conflicts that are truly just unnecessary that we all experience in a different light. And if you're open to receiving or just giving me a little bit of your time, then I look forward to my guests and I inspiring you to become a man that can have more freedom, less conflict, and more pleasure in their relationships. Thanks for joining me.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining me on another episode of the Real Zack Olinger. Today, my guest is Karla Hunt of Prioritizing Peace, and she is a performance coach that works with groups and individuals, high achievers, and high-performing individuals. And today she's going to be talking to us about boundaries and what that looks like in a variety of different types of relationships. So Karla, I really appreciate you taking the time to be a guest today on my podcast. And I'll just turn it over to you and let you start with it. Thank you.
Yeah. So boundaries. I feel like a lot of people think that it's a gross word, but I mean, a boundary is a real or an imagined, dividing line. So, I mean, when you think about like a real boundary, like you can think of like an actual like picket fence or barbed wire, or like when you think of the United States, we have like invisible boundaries that make up, like the shape of a state. It's not real. It's like we just decided that Illinois is like this funky shape, right? So they're real or imagined boundaries. But when it comes to individuals, when we're thinking about boundaries, it's what we do and don't want other people to do to us, what we will and will allow others in our, the way that other people treat us, right? So just setting those expectations and the consequences with others is really what we want to do. So it can be in a variety of ways. It can be on technology, don't call me after 7 p.m. or don't bother me before 10 a.m. if you're not a morning person. Or something new that I found for myself is setting technology boundaries within myself. Like I'm not going to spend more than an hour on Facebook. So you can even set boundaries with yourself. And then even a new one that I've been exploring. So the dating world is, what am I going to allow and not allow as I'm like dating new people and meeting new people, what is acceptable, what's not acceptable. And so that's been a whole new interesting thing for me.
For sure. Yeah. So if you don't mind, I'd like to kind of go on that tangent for just a minute, just because I'm just curious about like, I've spoken to one of the women I interviewed a little while ago, had a very interesting story about her dating experiences. And she's estimated that she's been on about 1,000 first dates, and she had some really interesting experiences and insights. So I'm just curious, if you don't mind, I mean, I'm just highly curious about like what are some of the boundaries that you'll speak to about like the dating world, and like what you, if you don't mind me asking, I'm just totally curious.
Yeah. I wonder, I'm curious, is like 1,000 first dates, is that pre-COVID or is that during COVID?
That was pre-COVID. Yeah, that's true. So I'm sure that slowed down. That did, if I recall her correctly, that slowed down during COVID for sure. But yeah, she's been dating for like, how long did she say? About 14 years or so, something like that. She wasn't married, hasn't been married, but she she's just had a lot of first dates, and it's a very interesting insights from that.
Yeah. I think as a female, like the boundary dynamic changes because, there's so many like safety things you have to think about. And like guys are just like, everything's fine. And women, we're overthinkers and we're just like, okay, he could be a serial killer. So we have to make sure that he doesn't know where we live. Like we have to meet at like a public place. We have to tell our friends where we went. We have to have like an emergency exit plan. And It's like all of these like little things that like we're thinking about that everyone else is like, it's fine, you're just going on a first date. But I actually have not gone like, I honestly don't think I've ever been on 1,000 first dates. I just recently started dating again in like mid-April. I was just like, well, I guess the world is trying to open up. I'll try online dating. We'll see what comes of it. We'll give it our best shot. And my dating rule is if I'm using like the Match app or a different app, I have like a rule as not to give my number to them, because I feel like it's a different exchange of energy, in my opinion, that I'm like, it's a different boundary to me. As like, if you stay inside the app and like we're hitting it off and I was like, and you asked me for my number and I'm like, I like you, I'll give you my number. But if I'm not feeling like the energy is off or something, I don't want to give you my number, because I don't want things to fizzle out. And it's just like, well, what was that energy exchange for? No reason, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I could definitely appreciate that. It's like a tier of like access or intimacy, like in a way. Like I know it's like some people might be like intimacy, be like, well, it's your personal number. Like you start at like a base level of the app, and then like your number is definitely a closer, like that's my phone number. Like, like it's not just my profile access on my app, like I can totally appreciate that. Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I'm just thinking back to like to that interview I had with that woman, and just some of the things that guys like will lead with, or what they'll talk about, or what their thoughts are or expectations are. And then it also reminds me too, like you said, about the danger and like having all like the things that women have to think about, letting your friends know, meeting in a public place, like having an exit strategy, like all this stuff. Reminds me of another interview that I had with a woman from the UK, who's blind, and her story was particularly fascinating, just because we spoke about that, right? I think most women, if not all, like on some level, even if they're not consciously thinking about it in the background, like have to really concern themselves about that in a way, like this of protection, or just like some type of threats, like that type of stuff, where guys we don't have that, and that takes a certain amount of energy, and just kind of like a certain subconscious level of stress, in a way. And then so her story about being a woman who's blind, and then she started doing like tantric work, and I was like, wow, like I can only imagine what that was like, just because of those things like you were mentioning, like of already having just, I think I get a little bit overwhelmed just having to think about like what you were just talking about, and then having that kind of be a day-to-day almost consideration in some regards is, I think we as men probably don't even consider that, or not aware of it, certainly take it for granted because we don't have to think about it. But I grew up with two sisters and have a lot of female friends, so I'm aware of these kind of things and considerations. So anyway, not to go on a tangent, but there's a lot that goes off into that. So yeah, the boundary with the giving people your phone number, I totally understand, or letting them know where you live, for sure, like absolutely, like yeah.
And I think what helps with the boundaries is like knowing what you will and won't allow, but even going into like looking at someone's profile, I think knowing what you will and won't allow already, and then also like making yourself aware of like, how are these people being and how they're showing up on their profile. And it's like, before you even engage or respond to someone's message, it's like, well, how did they show up and present to you before you even respond? Because if this person slides into your DMs and says something really inappropriate or cheeky to you, is that the kind of person that you want to go on a first date with? Because like, are you going to be on high alert when you go to that first date? Is that the kind of interaction that you want? Maybe you should swipe left and hit the X on them, And it's like, is their profile complete? Because the people who are not, investing the time and energy into completing their profile, is this person taking it seriously? Like, so the extra things that you want to consider with, the whole evaluation is like, how are they being? How are they showing up to, this site? What are they really trying to invest into it? What are they really wanting to gain from it? It's also how
Right.
I'm taking it too.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense as well. Because after my divorce, I did the online dating thing, for just a minute, not a super long time, because I found it to be, I don't know, I wasn't connecting with it. And at that period in time, I remember thinking like, how does this work for women? Because like just knowing guys, I was like, this has got to be highly, like, I can only imagine like what you guys get from like requests or messages and all this kind of a thing. And I'm like, this has got to be a rather horrible experience for women, I would think. I'm like, how does this work? How do women even get on the app? Like, because I would be like, if I were a woman, I'd be like, oh, I'd try it. And then I'd be like, yeah, I'm deleting this. Like, like I'm just not wasting my time. So, I guess in that regard, because it's speculation and I'm curious about that as well, that was my take on it. Like, after my divorce, and I didn't ask the woman who had 1,000 first dates specifically, although she spoke about it through some of the experiences that she had. What's been your experience using like doing, I know it's been just a couple of months, but so far, like what's that been like for you as a woman, like the dating app like type of experience? If you don't mind me asking, like some of this, if you don't feel like it, just that's fine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have had some of the exasperated moments, and I'm just like, this is so frustrating. Because it is a lot of just like sorting through profiles. And like I said, a lot of it is sorting through the people who, trying to find the right match that's like, how are they being? And a lot of it's like, they're not even showing up to play the game, if you will. And so I'm like, you're not even investing anything. Like your profile's incomplete. You have one picture. Sometimes it's not even of you. And so I'm just like, well, this is frustrating, because I was like, I would like a little bit more detail, a little bit more completion to see, sometimes I can't even like figure out how to start a conversation with a person, because I was like, there's no detail. So I was like, if I can't even figure out how to start a conversation with you, I don't know how to interact. I don't know how to like begin, that to open the door to know if I even like you. So it has been frustrating, but there has been some good conversations that I've had. I've met some good people. Like I've just been open-minded about like, okay, we'll see where this goes. I definitely think that it's worth giving it a try, because like it's one of those things where like you keep digging and digging and digging the hole, and it's like just before you give up, like the diamond is like right on the other side of that like 1 inch, like piece of dirt. It's kind of like that, where you're just like exasperated because you just keep digging. But there is some valuable gems in the app, I will say, but it's feels like it's very hard to find. I personally have had to expand my like the radius. I just went ahead and I was just like, I'm gonna cast a wider net. I made it like 500 miles, and people are just like, oh, you're in St. Louis, I'm in like Texas, or some other random state, and they're just like, oh, distance might be a problem. And I was like, I totally get it, I understand, but I'm exploring, because I feel like my little small radius here, I was like, I keep getting the same profiles over and over again.
Right.
I was like, I've seen this before.
Yeah, no, that's true. I kind of did the same thing, when I was doing it after the divorce. It's like, well, like, I live in Kansas City, and I'm like, I don't really want to like drive like an hour. Like I shouldn't have to. I live around like hundreds of thousands of people like right here. Like, isn't there, like, there's got to be something within, like, if I want to just go out for the evening, that kind of a thing. And then I was like, no, I had to start whining out the same thing. And but yeah, I felt like the same way too, that it was exasperating, because I felt like I was looking for a job. Honestly, I was like, that looks good, like put an application or something like that, or just kind of like, no, this kind of a thing. And I'm just like, I don't know, like my experience, like it just I don't know, I didn't enjoy it. But then I was very lonely homebody for a long time due to that kind of a thing. So all of that's on me. But yeah, just just probably how I was showing up too, I'm sure, like on the app. I took the time to fill it out, and like I put multiple pictures on and all that stuff, but just even energetically, how was I being as I was going into that? Like really, I'm sure it made a big difference. And I could just reflect back onto how I was at the time. And yeah, it makes sense that, things weren't panning out. So, so, uh, so with boundaries, I'm curious as well, like, there's all sorts of relationships in our life and everything. So, are there any any interesting anecdotes or stories about like friends or family where you've had to set boundaries and things like that that you would like to speak to?
Yeah.
I'm curious about that as well.
Yeah, I've had a few weird ones lately. So I recently, well, let me see if I should share that one. Well, let me start with this one first. So I recently took my mom to the heart doctor, and she set a boundary with like the nurse practitioner because she sits in the room with the doctor. And this nurse practitioner does like this tag team thing. Well, she'll like ask a question, and then like the doctor will ask a question, but like the question will be conflicting to like whatever my mom will have asked. And so she was like, I don't want you in the room.
Mm,
And then like I was in the room with my mom as she's setting this boundary. And my mom immediately is just like, I don't want to make you mad. And then like I'm looking at her like, it's fine, it's fine. So like I'm there reinforcing her setting a boundary with this woman. And then like as she leaves, she like agrees that she won't be in the room. But then my mom proceeds to be like, was that fine? And I was like, everything's fine. And I was like, and don't worry about whether she's mad or not. I was
mhm,
like, how she chooses to react to your boundary is like on her.
mhm, mhm.
And so like just helping her set a boundary has been like a big thing.
That's good. Yeah, and especially in that type of context, like when we're talking about like our health and well-being, like yeah, like what we will and won't tolerate is huge. Yeah, and that's an interesting point too, for sure. A lot of people, I feel like, anyway, because I just know I've done it, in the past, where either I feel bad about the boundary I set, or I don't set a boundary because I don't want to like rock the boat or antagonize somebody. Like I'll abdicate my own authority for somebody else's, like for their well-being. So I'll totally subjugate myself to something that I didn't want to like experience, because I don't want to hurt their feelings or piss them off or whatever.
Yeah.
That led to unhealthy things. That was totally apparent in my marriage. Yeah, for sure. Like for me. Yeah.
Yeah. I had a friend who just like emotionally unloaded on me. And it was during a time that like I just didn't have the emotional capacity to take it on. And all I said was like, I wish you would have like asked me before you just dumped this on me,
Mhm.
because I didn't have the ability. Like I can't do anything for you right now. And then this person proceeded to block me on all social media after I had set the boundary. And I was just like, it is what it is. I was
Right.
like, that's what you chose to do after I set the boundary. You didn't like how I chose to set the boundary and
Mhm.
how I said, I can't do anything for you right now. And I said right now, and I still sent, support and love anyway, even though I said I can't do anything for you in this situation. Um, but that particular person just didn't respond well to that boundary. But they chose to remove themselves.
Mhm.
And so that is their choice. That's on them. And a lot of times, like we fear the response, but in reality, whatever their response is, that's what needed to happen.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and I think a lot of times people don't, yeah, they just feel like setting the boundary is like being antagonistic towards another person. It's being inconsiderate when it's really about self-care, like it's like
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with like taking care of ourselves. I think we're not really taught or modeled that doing that is okay, and that those that do it are being selfish. Like it's a completely inverted way of, at least I feel like we've been more or less on some level kind of taught that, or modeled that, where it's kind of like, oh, if you that person's stating like like their boundary around that, like they're just kind of being an asshole. And it's like, no, not really. Like, like they're just stating what they will and will not tolerate, like it's just like you said earlier, it's just kind of like, when you go traveling internationally, it's kind of like everybody needs to have a passport, and some countries allow other passports in and others don't. It's like, well, is that country being an asshole? And it's like, not necessarily. They just have rules about who they will and won't let in, that kind of a thing. They've got procedures on like how they're going to like process this stuff. It's just how they do it, like,
Yeah. And it's for safe, they do it on purpose, and it's a safety mechanism to protect their country, right? And the same thing with boundaries, and it's to benefit both you and your relationship in that situation. So when a boundary needs to be set, a lot of times, like with the emotional unloading or with my mom and her doctor, that was to benefit both their relationship, so that she doesn't, up and go get another doctor, or she doesn't end up not getting the information she needs and doesn't get the procedure. So when you're in a relationship and it feels heavy, or you feel drained after interacting with someone, eventually you're going to get a rift between you two if a boundary isn't set. So it's, again, like I said, it's for protecting both of you.
That's a good point. I like the example of like, well, I could just go get another doctor. And that could be true of like, any type of like relationship, right? It's just kind of like, well, I mean, like if you value the relationship and you want to maintain it, like, it's not that to say that we're indispensable because we're all unique, but at the same time, like if you do value the relationship, like that's what it's for. The boundary is to protect that exchange. Like if you want to continue having me in your life, or like this relationship in your life, then here's what needs to be done. This is true all the time in parenting and things like that. You set the what is and isn't like okay in the house, and like these are the boundaries, these are the expectations, like you set them. So like to me it's the same kind of thing. It's like some people might be like, well, you can't necessarily, like in my example, like being divorced, people might be like, well, you can't kick your kids out. And I remember a time when I set a real strong boundary with my oldest son. I'm like, I don't have to live with this. I was like, that's part of the reason, like, I divorced your mom. I was like, so if you want to be like that, you can, and I will go send you to live with her, like, yeah. So anyway, just, boundaries, look different in different contexts, but in essence, this is what they are. And it's about protecting the relationship. Is true. I really appreciate that reminder, because I think some people, I mean, it's easy. I was thinking of it one-sided for sure in a way. So
Yeah.
So let's see here. Just kind of thinking about something else to ask or go along with on that. So
Well, while you're thinking, something
yes,
that
please.
I was thinking about is when I was first, like a while ago, learning about boundaries, and I was, talking to some guy at what was it, like a dealership, and he was just like chatting along with me, and then he gave me his phone number and was like, yeah, if you ever need any help with anything, like just let me know. And then I was just kind of like, I felt really uncomfortable that he gave me his phone number, right? And then I was just like kind of beside myself, because then he started asking me like to go on dates. And then I definitely was like concerned that like this person was just like one of those people that's like overstepping a boundary. And then I had spoken to someone about it, and then they had said there are people who will ask, like 100 people in a room kind of thing. And like the people who are not familiar with boundaries and who never, and it's a learned behavior, right? Is like, if we aren't taught boundaries, if our parents weren't taught boundaries, we don't know what we don't know. And so like people who prey on people without boundaries, they will ask 100 people out of a room, they'll ask them the same question, and the one person who answers the question correctly, that's the person that they prey on. And so it's not that like the person who always answers a question correctly or whatever is the victim. And that's why they feel in the victim mentality. It's that one person, you answered the question correctly. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because they're always, but a lot of people are just like, well, why me? Why did they pick me? They didn't pick you. They just happened to ask, 100 people, quote unquote, the same question, you answered correctly.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's true. It's like, uh, so I was just thinking in a technical sense, like, uh, from my background in being in IT, they do like what's called penetration testing on like, on the defenses or the security of systems, like to see like where the vulnerabilities are. But that's like, that's a technical boundary, right? Like about how the system
Yeah.
is set up. But yeah, the same kind of a thing. Like, yeah, I like that analogy of asking 100 people, and the one that didn't happen to have the boundary is the one that, yeah, is the one
Yeah.
that's then used or leveraged or.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's once we know better, we can do better. But it's putting the information out there and helping people with boundaries, and teaching people about boundaries.
Yeah, and that it's like you said, that it's not a dirty word or a dirty thing to do, like that
Yeah.
it's quite okay. It's actually necessary, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah.
And I know that's something that I had to grow into as well. Like, after the divorce, like learning to put myself, take care of myself, put myself first, which felt very selfish to me. And then what I wouldn't tolerate, in a lot of different ways, in a lot of ways, and not feeling bad about it, and that even over the past, year, or at least a good 9 months, redefining what that looks like, in some of the more intimate relationships, like with my family and things like that, on both sides, like redefining boundaries, on both sides of that relationship equation. And I know a lot of people can relate to that too, with just family in general, just um, what they're going to be available for and not available for. Yeah, yeah. And that, like you said, it's have the relationship. There's things that need to be defined or redefined, and it's okay to do that. It's okay for both sides to do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
hmm
I really like that point that you just made, that they need to be defined and then they can be redefined at any point in time. So like if something needs to be changed, and it's an evolution, so they can adapt and change at any point in time. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not something that has to be like set in stone and like never revisited or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's a dynamic thing, like anything else, because like you said, with your friend, like you're just setting the boundary, like where it's like, look, like in this moment, like I don't have the capacity or availability for this, so like that's my boundary in the now. And then like if like in the future, like like if you were to ask, or like if you check in, like I could totally be available. Like it's a shifting thing, like some boundaries are more set than others for sure, but everything can be negotiated or changed or reevaluated is probably the best way to put it, because nothing remains the same throughout your life. There's so many
Yeah.
things change and are dynamic, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. So awesome. um hmm. Sorry, I'm just kind of thinking, was there any other thing about boundaries that you would like to talk about, or examples or anything, or
I'm trying to think of another good one. So because I just recently just did two of my own podcasts. Like one was all about like technology boundaries, and then the one that I did um, today is all about like having a boundary buddy, and just really setting boundaries with other people and what that looks like. And really, even if you wait until like the boundary, like even if you wait until the last minute to make a boundary, like when you feel like you're ready just to dissolve the friendship, like just be proud of yourself that you made a boundary. Like you didn't do nothing at all.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah. I'm just trying to think, like, for some reason that just brings up like like an experience that I had like after my divorce. I should say actually it was before my divorce, was final and everything. So I had a couple of friends like around that time, that I just basically cut out, of my life. And we didn't necessarily like discuss boundaries. It wasn't a boundary kind of a thing, it was just like I made a choice. It was a very hard line choice, and it wasn't pleasant to do, but I did it to because I guess it wasn't a boundary that I defined for them in the sense of like, hey, we're going to talk about this and this is going to be the boundary. It was a boundary for within myself and like who I will and won't have in my life anymore, right? And so I executed, made choices based upon that. And to speak to like how things can be reevaluated, within the last couple of weeks, I had the opportunity to see one of these individuals again. And when the opportunity first presented itself to have the opportunity to see them, I was like, I didn't have a charge around it, right? I didn't have like back handful, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I obviously had emotional charge around it. And I was thinking about it. It's like, I don't have a charge around it now. Like I'm clear with it. And I was like, but at the same time, like, what's my intention? Like, what would be my intention for seeing them? And like, at my first reaction, and I sat with it for a little bit, I was like, nah, like I made that choice for a reason. And I don't want to like really re-engage, like would bring something from my past back. So yeah, like I don't think so, And then it got to be the day that they were in town, and like some of my other friends were going to be out and seeing them. And I just happened to remember, and it was early enough in the day where I could revisit this, and I was like, I know what I said before. And while that's true, it's not necessarily false what I said before. I'm like, I'm reevaluating it. And I'm like, I feel like maybe I should go ahead and just give this a chance, and like just just see what happens. You know what I mean? It's not that I'm to keep the boundary. Like, I don't have to necessarily reinvite this back into my life. And at the same time, I feel like I need to also give myself the opportunity to just kind of check in and see, what it's like, for myself, to allow myself to just have the experience of like, what is going on here with them, and like what's going on with me, like see where am I at really with this. If I don't take the opportunity, I won't really know what I do feel about it, and so I let myself go out that night and hang out with my friends, this particular person and everything. And it was a good evening. There was definitely some things like that, that I was like, okay, like I get it. Like, but there was no emotional charge. There wasn't any anger or hostility or anything like that. There was just kind of a confirmation and just kind of an awareness, that came along with it, which was really good for me to have. So I just put that particular example out there of like what it was like to set that really big boundary in my life, and then to many years later reevaluate it, but I did reevaluate it, and that kind of a thing. So that's that particular, yeah, that led me on that tangent. So yeah.
Well, on a similar tangent, my family of origin on my mom's side, I have similar boundaries where I am not friends with any of the people on my mom's side of the family on Facebook. And unless specifically requested by one particular cousin who I am still friends with, to go to like a family function, I don't show up for family functions. I'm kind of like the black sheep where I'm just like, I do my own thing. I don't have to participate with you all. I don't like the drama. I don't like the chaos. I don't like the energy that is in these events. So unless particularly specifically asked for the request of my presence, I do not attend. That is the boundary that I have. But I mentally prepare, meditate the morning of, and then I'll go. But it's usually one of those things where it's, like I said, there's no negativity on my part. Like, I can feel a different chaotic energy while I'm there, but I know that that's not mine. So it's just knowing like what my boundaries are, what I will and won't do, and then knowing that when I need to leave, should I am no longer engaging in this, even though I chose to go to attend with one other person who asked me to go to like a particular family function.
Yeah, no, that's a good point about that. Just even if you choose to go and participate, like what's your boundary around your level of participation? Like yeah, for sure. Like some boundaries within boundaries, right? Like it's there's multiple layers there for that. It's just like the dating app, right? There's each level, there's another, there's just what are you going to allow in, what you're going to tolerate. And so I'm curious as well regarding the family, like at what age were you when you started to define that? Because I think some people can have a hard time with setting those boundaries. So I'm just kind of curious, like, if you don't mind, because I know for me, like I was in my 40s, and I started redefining this stuff, and so I would say it took me a while to kind of get to a point where I became pretty bold with how I defined some of my boundaries and things like that. So if you don't mind, I'm just kind of curious, like how long it may have taken you.
It has evolved, but it started when I was 17, and I was like, I could use work as an excuse. So like I would work on holidays, and I was like, I don't have to go to Thanksgiving at grandma's house because I have to work on Thanksgiving. And then I would intentionally sign up for the Thanksgiving shifts. And so like it started when I was in high school, because I was like, I can work now legally. So
yeah, gotcha.
it started then, and it slowly evolved. And then I was just like, well, I just don't have to go. I don't have to make excuses. I don't have to sign up for work anymore. Like, I just don't have to go to this. And no one can make me because I'm an adult.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's a great point to make too, right? I love that particular example where we find like a shield to use as our boundary, right? So in this example, it was like work. Be like, here's my excuse, like for not going, to like create. And I know parents use their kids as an excuse, especially when they're young. Be like, oh, the baby's like this, and it's kind of like, instead of just being honest, right? I mean, that's the hard part, is just being authentic and honest about being like, yeah, no, like, like, and I'm not going to feel bad about it, right? Because like, I think that comes back to our conditioning. And I'm curious, like, where exactly that comes from, about feeling bad about saying no, or like you setting this boundary and not using something else as like that shield, of just being like, nope, that's just me, and that's what I want or don't want. And that's that, rather than like using something else as the excuse for that. So I love that particular example, because I think we've all totally done that, where it's kind of like, oh, this is going to make this easier to be like, I'll just say this, even though like I really don't want to, like, I'm so glad I have that so I can put that in front of me. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess then too, to speak to that point, when did you start to like execute it without like using an excuse? Like what empowered you to go ahead and set your own boundary without feeling bad about it, like instead of using your job as an excuse or something like that, right? Like, because I think that takes a certain self-confidence and like being okay, with your own authority. Like, so what kind of like led you into that, or brought you into that, like being okay with that? Yeah.
I'm not sure if there was like a specific moment, but I honestly, it was probably me being enraged about a certain Thanksgiving like organization thing, because I was willing to participate in one Thanksgiving thing, because I was like told by one of my other cousins that I still hang out with, like, hey, I really want you to go to this Thanksgiving event. But they were all I was in a huge group text, and someone said something that I did not find appropriate about someone, a different cousin that had passed away. And then they were all doing like this guilt trip thing about like, well, this could be grandma's last Thanksgiving. Well, from that year, grandma lived like another 15 years. And I was just like, I don't do guilt trips. And so
Right.
I was just like, y'all are not travel agents. You're not taking me on a guilt trip. So at this point, I was just like, I do not respond to guilt trips. And so like I just made it very clear that I was just like, what you said was not okay about, speaking ill of the dead. And then I was like, and I'm just not responding to guilt trips. I was just like, we're just not doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just like, I think it was just like being angry and then just saying how I felt and just did not care what happened. And then I just like left the group chat because like I knew that the person of the deceased and her kids were not happy about what was said. And then they left the group chat. So I was like, a lot of people were upset. And then I was just like, well, I'm going to go ahead and say what I'm going to say because, no one's going to care. People are already mad anyway. And then I was just like, and I'm not going to show up. So you can't do anything either.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's just what it was. It was just like, well, people say stuff on the internet all the time, behind a computer screen. And I think that was kind of like where, that, I guess the courage came from. Is I was just like, I was in a group text. And it's just like, well, I'm going to go ahead and say what I'm going to say. And you can't do anything to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that's an important distinction of either like, probably pain or anger is probably a point where people like start to define that boundary because it's a good place. I mean, we just tolerate things up to a certain threshold, and then we're kind of like, okay, now I need to do something to like, we're not experiencing this anymore, like that kind of a thing. Like, so yeah, I think that's a great point, so yeah, it's probably not any necessarily moment in time, but it could be like an experience. And maybe if it's big enough, like you start to be able to reflect back and be like, that was a really big boundary that I set. I actually gave myself permission to stand up in that situation and define that. And if it's big enough, you'd be like, well, if I did that, then where else can I do this? Like where like I need to, it might give you the click to kind of be like, I need to redefine things in like other areas of my life that seemed threatening or overwhelming or hard to do for whatever reason, because a lot of it is about, I think, how we're considering other people, and I think a lot of us put other people before ourselves, like, and so
Yeah.
we because of that, we experience things that we wouldn't want to experience, like because we don't have those stronger boundaries, and yeah, I think it does take those pain points or pressure points to be kind of pressed before we're like, yeah, that shit's got to change. Like,
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think that the boundaries, like, and they're in every single area of our life. Like, it's not just relationships, it's at work. And so like, and it spills over into your relationships. So like, if you don't have good boundaries at work and your boss just keeps piling more shit onto your desk, right? And you don't push back and say like, this is too much for one person. And then you go home and you're already drained, that's going to affect your relationship. And then like your spouse is going to have to like set boundaries with you if you're being a dick when you get home.
Right.
So like the boundaries there are multiple layers to it. So like if you don't have strong boundaries at work, that affects your personal relationships because you're emotionally drained from not having the boundaries there. And it goes on and on and on. Like it's just like a big, Venn diagram.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's all interconnected and linked together because if it can cascade into other areas of life. So yeah, the boundaries like is like, yeah, basically the image that comes to my mind is like some type of membrane, like energetically. So if you've got a weak point on one part of that overall kind of like energetic bubble, then whatever comes in from whatever angle can, I don't want to, the word poison kind of comes in, but poison your inner being, which then is going to like, the inner being's touching all of these other boundaries, like, or these other relationships, like if it poisons you within, then it's gonna like totally show up in any other area of your life, so yeah, keeping the boundary in all areas, like being self confident enough to be able to establish that wherever you go, or whatever relationship you're experiencing, yeah, is pretty key, for sure, or else it's gonna show up somewhere else, yeah,
Yeah.
unintentionally, like you won't even know, yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
true. Yeah, cool. Well, Karla, I want to give you a chance to talk about where people can find you, like how they can work with you. So, yeah, please tell us where we can find you and connect with you.
Yeah. So you can find me at prioritizingpeace.com, at Prioritizing Peace on Facebook and on Instagram. And you can join my Prioritizing Peace for Entrepreneurs on Facebook as well. That's my group. But yeah, I am everywhere. I'm also on LinkedIn. And my podcast is Unapologetically Prioritizing Peace on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Karla. Really appreciate you taking the time to be a guest today, and had a great time chatting with you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Of course.
All right, that wraps up today's episode of The Real Zack Olinger. Thanks again for listening. If you happen to find this episode insightful or valuable, I invite you to pass it along to somebody else, because chances are, if you found it valuable, they will too. If you're on Instagram, you can find me at The Real Zack Olinger. Until next time, everybody. Thanks for listening.